ensuring that the power of the government is returned to the people. I firmly believe not only do we need term limits, not only do members of Congress or the federal government not need to be held to a higher level, but we need to decentralize control in Washington, D.C. All of the EPA, the federal agencies, they need to be removed from the swamp, removed from an area of the country that votes 98% for Hillary Clinton over Donald Trump, and put to rural parts of the country, Ohio, Georgia, invigorating, unleashing the power of the rural areas of this country, because that is where the backbone of the United States is all about. So, to answer your question, which I felt like I was going back to a bar exam, the answer is yes, I'm in favor of that.
I think my backbone is the reason I'm running for U.S. Congress is I am sick and tired of all this year. I've been watching all these politicians. Their attitude is so ugly. They think they are better than us. Only time you see them, than politician, only election time. Am I right? Once they elected, you don't even see them. You know what? They hang around with Washington and the lobbyists, special interest group. They go along, get along with them people. They be saying all this sugarcoating on that during the election time, but once they get elected, they just forget about the constituents. Guess what? Reason I'm running because I want to be the very first congressman ever exercise role model for your constituents. I want to connect in with my people. I want to be every day. Remember, first I say introduce. I want to serve my time to 100%. Not only hang around to Washington, but I also come around my district, connecting with the people, listen to what the problem is. So, of course, you are my boss. I'm not your boss. You are my boss. I'm going to listen to you. I'm going to deliver your voice to the Washington. The Washington doesn't party leader is not my boss. They didn't elect me to go to Washington. You're the one voted me to go to Washington. That's why I keep saying over and over, Washington need a U-turn. I need you to vote for you, for you. Thank you very much.
Suzi?
First part of my platform is we, the people, and I am determined when I get to Washington, D.C. to do exactly what that says. I'm going not only to serve you, but the reason I'm going is Washington has usurped too much power that does not belong to them. It is the people who have the rights, and we grant the power either to Washington, D.C., or we grant the power to the states. Those are the things that we have got to keep our eye on. We cannot be granting something that increases the size of government. If everyone is to go on, first of all, let me back up a little bit. I believe in a much more level playing field. But let me go into it this way. If everyone, the Congress and all of us, go onto a single-payer system, that is what we have been fighting for years. We have been fighting single-payer. Social Security, if you remember, in 2003-ish, President Bush came out with a plan where you had 5 plans plus Social Security. 5 of them were private, 1 was Social Security. I believe if we move towards something like that, where people can invest their own money more wisely, no one can take it away, we're going to get back to whether it's a pension system or if somebody decides to keep Social Security. You know, that might be a fun thing for somebody who wants to. But I'd rather manage my own money and get government out of my pocket, get government out of my health care. But yes, I do believe Congress needs to be on whatever the same plan is, because we're just citizen legislators. That's all we are. We're here to serve, and I will do whatever I can do to unwind that.
Thank you. Paulette, you're up next. Just a reminder, there is a cooler with water in the background. Okay, for the 4th question.
in debt. I feel that, number one, we need to put the Constitution in force. Because in the Constitution it says and it states that they're supposed to balance the budget every year. Just like you have to balance your budget in your business, your homes, they should at least, we should give them, we can amend this since we're $30 trillion in, that every 4 years the budget has to be balanced. And until the people, we the people, stand up and say that you can't spend no more money when you're $30 trillion in debt. And we just have to have our voice heard, and we have to know that we're the ones that tell the politicians what to do. They work for you. And another thing about government, there are some good people working for government, and there are some bad people. I have an accountant that she has a business with over 3,300 people, and she was a manager there. She said they wake up in the morning and they make a bill. It has nothing to do with it if it's for the people. They just make a bill. And she said on Mondays they go to work and they said, oh, we're tired from the weekend. On Tuesday they said, oh, we'll get a little something done. On Wednesday they work. And then Thursday, oh, Friday coming. We got to get ready for the weekend. So I feel that we the people need to have a voice and start speaking up against things like that.
Rich, you need a repeat?
The question is, do we have the stomach for it? It's been a long time since the president actually got up and said, we're going to cut the budget and mean it. And in fact, you might have to go all the way back to Coolidge. Because even Reagan admitted at the end of his presidency he didn't do a good enough job with it. During our best economy in world history, just recently, when Trump had one of the best economies, the lowest unemployment in history for African Americans, lowest unemployment in history for Hispanics, one of the lowest for women. We had a booming economy, and yet still that same year we had $1 trillion of deficit spending. So the question is, who are we as a party? How do we define ourselves? Because we're raising our kids right now to turn to the government to solve the very problems that the government created. This is the problem. It starts at a very young age when we tell our kids, when you want something done, the government's going to give it to you. I had a drink with Senator Ted Cruz once recently, and I said, if I want to shrink government, which I do, if I want to cut a budget, if I want to control spending, what are the realities of that? How likely am I able to do that? I realize, maybe not as a first-year congressman, but as I get more advanced and I get more ingrained, I get more relationships, how likely is that to happen? He said, 0. So what do you mean, sir? He said, the problem is 19 out of 20 things that you vote on are controlled by lobbyists and by a speaker. And until we as a people rise up and demand accountability, when we contract with the people and say we're going to have a budget that's balanced and we have to make some hard decisions because everybody has something good they want to be spent on. And sometimes bad things happen to America, and are you going to use that as an excuse, like a virus, to spend $6 trillion? Or are you going to say, no, we're not going to do that? It's time for the people to solve our own problems. But that requires a lot of backbone and a lot of moxie when you're standing up against an entire nation who doesn't believe the same as you. So we need people up there who are going to fight and have that reality. Thank you.
65% of the nation is employed by small businesses. Small businesses every day have to balance their budgets. There's many of you that are in this audience right now that own small businesses. You have to balance that budget to make sure your employees are paid. You have to balance that budget to make sure your own household bills are paid. And many times, you're the last one to get paid. I've personally experienced this. I've personally gone through this. One time I even had to sell my truck just to make payroll. But that's what you do when you employ people. You put the people first. So when you're balancing your budget, what do? Well, maybe I'm not going to go to Starbucks 25 times this month. It's amazing you can buy a lake house for what you spent at Starbucks. But that's what we have to do, and that's what we have to bring back to our U.S. government. It's very simple. Cut the wasteful spending. If we have to put a bill together, then don't put a bunch of pork in it. Do you recall the CARES Act when it came through? And it got held up for all those businesses and all those people because they didn't want to put the people first. We needed funding for the Kennedy Center. Don't worry about trying to keep your employees working. It's time we get back to that small government. The small government needs to stay out. The government needs to stay out of my kitchen and needs to stay out of my business. Because when Americans are set free and the handcuffs are taken off, damn, we thrive more than anybody.
The one constitutional requirement of our state legislature is that we pass a balanced budget every single year. Why on the earth can our federal government not do that? Do y'all even remember the last time a president proposed an actual budget, or that Congress actually did anything on a budget? They've been passing Band-Aids for the last, I don't even know how long, and rushing to add as much pork that they could when the government might come up to the edge of shutting down. So if we're going to come to passing a balanced budget, which I absolutely would recommend, we have to look inward and say, what are we willing to sacrifice? What cuts are we as Americans willing to sacrifice? Because it's not just going to be reckless spending, although yes, we obviously need to trim that by 100%. But what else are we going to do in order to get our country back on track? Whatever it is, I beg you to do it, because it's worth it, because my kids and your grandkids and our kids for hundreds of generations, if we last that long, will be the ones that are going to be paying for it.
Can you repeat the question for me again? I will make sure I answer the right thing. Is it possible for the federal government to get back to a balanced budget? And how can we do that?
Yeah, it's possible. It's very possible, and I'm in favor of a balanced budget amendment in conjunction with term limits and upper out renewal program within the executive branch hierarchy of bureaucracy. But nothing's stopping us short. We don't have an amendment now. We don't have that forced provision. But nothing's stopping Congress from passing a balanced budget. We just won't do it. And we won't do it because conservatives negotiate against themselves. In the budgeting process, when we pass those continuing resolutions and those Band-Aids, we come in for funding for things we don't want to fund. The Department of Education. Who in here would say $0 for the Department of Education? Anybody? There's one. There's a few, right? But nobody would do that in Congress. I want to propose $0 of funding for the Department of Education. And then I want to see Nancy Pelosi's head just spin full around. Right? But I want to talk about the EPA. The Department of Energy. I want to talk about a lot of agencies that I don't want to fund. Certainly not at their current levels. Right? And that's step one. An amendment, because we probably have to have it to get it done. But short of that, let's just negotiate aggressively. And that's one of the things that this party loved about Donald Trump when he came in, is he wasn't worried about making friends with politicians. Republicans have a bad history of wanting to be liked. That's a problem. That's a problem when you're negotiating with a party that doesn't negotiate in good faith. And that's what Democrats don't do. Right? So let's negotiate in our own favor. Let's negotiate aggressively. And let's defund the Department of Education.
Ronald Reagan, he's got a great phrase, which is one of my favorites, which is 10 of the most scary words is, I'm from the federal government and I'm here to help. And the reality is the federal government does almost nothing good. The Department of Education is a perfect example. $68 billion budget, has spent over $1.4 trillion since its inception in 1980. Test scores have not went up, they went down. We are not going at the same level of all of our peers. Western European nations, the Asian nations, in fact, are grossly trailing them. In my opinion, it's education disarmament. It's a national security threat. But the reality for this question is almost all of the federal agencies can either be eliminated or greatly, greatly dismantled. The next thing we've got to do is get out of these forever wars. Ukraine is a perfect example. We've got to put Americans first. We've got to make sure we're protecting our own southern border and not a European border. Fair tax, I'm for it. If you implement the fair tax right out of the gate, you can just about eliminate the IRS, which is one of the most bloated areas of government, which imposes massive administrative costs on each and every one of you guys in this room to do your taxes. April 15th is coming back. Roll back administrative decision making. The amount of decisions that are made not by your elected officials, but by bureaucrats in D.C. are overwhelming. We've got to make sure your elected congressperson is making that decision and not a bureaucrat in D.C. One of my goals is to be on the Oversight Committee. I want to be on the Oversight Committee so I can audit Department of Defense, Department of Education to ensure that these folks are actually making decisions using their administrative decision-making process that are best for you guys and that are not best for ensuring they're getting local trips to Martha's Vineyard or Jackson Hole. So that's the way we get control of the spending.
My fellow Republican, this time you need to really think hard to pick who you want to be next to your congressman. You got to have business background congressman in Washington. We got too many lawyers in Washington. That's what the problem today. Of course, yes, we can do balanced budget. I want to stop completely all this foreign aid. Zero. We have too many wasteful money going out of just everywhere. I want to put the UN, United Nations, push them out of the Hudson River. They can go somewhere else. We've been supporting for the last 60-some years the United Nations. What have they ever done to us? Nothing. Zero. But yet we continuously funding. What kind of person try to borrow the money to helping other countries? Are we crazy? I mean, my God, American is crazy. We keep borrowing the money or print the money, sending all these other countries the money. We just sending money to the Egyptian government to helping their southern border. But this administration, they don't even take care of our southern border, but they worry about the Egyptian southern border. They pay all this money to other countries. They don't even appreciate us. I want to stop completely all this foreign aid. I want to completely stop funding the United Nations. Whatever they want to go, go. Plus, yes, Department of Education, I want to cut them out. EPA, I want to cut them out. And OSHA, I want to cut them out. Thank you.
The microphone, Suzi.
Oh.
Thank you.
I feel all right. Maybe I got so angry about this subject.
Absolutely. It's time to balance the budget. It's time for a balanced budget amendment. But the one thing we have to do is we have to come up with a new budgeting process. This process that we're doing now, besides kicking the can down the road, these continuing resolutions that we have, they do nothing. We have to take the provisions for emergencies out. We're always going to have some sort of an emergency, particularly if there are not conservative-minded people who are willing to say no. It would be much better to put the budget on a 2-year cycle, as has been proposed, and that we can begin to redline. We also need to have line item veto. That's a thing that its time has come again and again and again, but it's time so that whatever is excess fat in there can have a little red line through it, and it can be taken out of the budget. The other thing that we need to do, you know I am for reducing the size of Washington. I have advocated for years to get rid of the Department of Education. That's just a start. That's a local issue. We don't need to be adding to our federal issues. That needs to come home. But part of the problem also is at home. Our state government, I'm just going to talk about Georgia, I'm not going to talk about all the other 57 states. Remember that line? Our state gets nearly $50 billion. This is not going to just mean we cut here in Washington or cut there in Washington. It's going to mean we have to be willing to cut here. What are we willing to not say, gimme, gimme, gimme? I mean, here we're expanding Medicaid. They're sitting debating expanding Medicaid. That's a federal. That's, give me some more money. Give me some money quick. We have to be willing to say enough is enough. We don't need extra coffee pots.
In our house, we give our kids green cards. I don't know if y'all seen those before. And it's to train kids how to manage money. You give them a set amount of money on it, and then once it's gone, and they get it for a certain amount of time. We do it weekly. It sounds like the most remedial concept ever, but it's so foundational. And for those of us that have run businesses, my husband and I, we used to build homes. We had a construction business, and you had a budget, and you had a set amount that you could spend on each house, and you had to work it out. You had to work it out. So again, conceptually, from a policy standpoint, the solutions are not elusive. We have a leadership deficit, and I'm going to go back to that. Under Obama, the Republicans had the opportunity to balance the budget. Did they? No. Miss the Republicans. They could have done it, and they chose not to. Instead, we've stayed on this path and this trajectory that is creating a welfare state. America is like a welfare state, and we saw that so pronounced during COVID. Our government, against the cries of the people, spending, 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 literally paying people to stay home. And you know, we're all the same. We run in similar communities, help wanted signs everywhere. I was talking to a friend of mine on Saturday. They normally run, they own a handful of restaurants, they normally run at 500 employees across their 5 restaurants. They have less than 200 now, and they can't find anywhere to work. So not only is the government spending recklessly, and yes, every agency, it's like a pig farm. We could cut, but they are, it's a mindset, it's a mentality that is the most un-American thing I've ever seen, which is the welfare state and paying people to stay home. So these are simple concepts. I'm going to go back to it constantly, but they require courage and bravery to implement.
Okay, Rich, you lead off on this one. Do you believe in a smaller federal government with states' rights as per the U.S. Constitution? And how do you shrink the Goliath-sized government we now have?
I feel like we just talked about this. The realities are that the federal government continues to demand power from us. All these departments we just got done talking about are when we send Americans money from Georgia up to the federal government and then beg for it back. And somebody came up to me and said in the lobby and said, hey, look, what are you going to do about Post Road? Well, we shouldn't be looking to the federal government to fix a local road. Why are we paying the federal government to employ tens of thousands of people and then have to beg for the money that we gave them? It's the same thing that happens with our education money. We send a bunch of money up there to employ a bunch of bureaucrats so that we can beg for the money back with strings attached on what we get to teach our children. The more we get rid of federal government, the better. The more we push down to the local level, the better. The more we empower the lowest level, the better. That's why I'm very encouraged by watching people actually get involved in school boards and taking back government at the lowest level possible. That's where it all belongs. That's where all the power should be. The more we can eliminate the upper echelon of government, the better. And that's exactly when it goes back to balancing the budget. There will always be a great cause. When in the 1920s, when the floodplains of Mississippi flooded, Coolidge said, no, we're not going to bail it out. Imagine somebody saying that now. Imagine when you have an earthquake or a tornado or something, FEMA's not going to come. Do we have the backbone to say the federal government's not responsible, the state government's got to bail it out, the individuals, the churches, the communities? Who do we turn to when times go bad? How can we flex to expand and contract based on need rather than on a government that's always waiting to take care of us when things go wrong? That's what I stand for.
Do you believe in a smaller federal government with states' rights as per the U.S. Constitution? And how do you shrink the life-size government we now have?
Well, the first answer is yes. I believe in smaller government. I believe we need to shrink it. I believe the power is left by the Constitution to the states. It's just like the elections. How do we, it goes back to the same thing. How do we shrink it? Actually, I have to kind of echo Rich a little bit. It's called, you look at it on a per need basis. When you run a business, it's on a per need basis. There's always a little bit of forecast as well. We have to do that at the same time. Everything is a fine balance between the government and between the people. And we have to be willing to work with both. Because guess what? You can't take away all these entitlement programs completely. Because maybe your mother's at home or your grandmother and sitting on Social Security. Well, guess what, guys? That's an entitlement program. People do fall down. It happens. I fell down. But I got back up. And that's the American way. So yeah, balance the budget. Don't need big government. But we still have to have some help for the people. Just not a handout.
Yes, pass a balanced budget amendment so that we can all go home from Washington and come back here. Because at the end of the day, you don't want to have to talk to one person who represents 760,000 of you. When I was in the State House, I represented 52,400 people. I was simply more accessible. That is the type of dynamic in the State House and the State Senate. The State Senate, I think they represent about 160,000 people. But those are the people that you can hold the most accountable. And that's the people that our U.S. Constitution has set out to being the most accountable and to having the power. That's the whole point, is that the people have the power. And that Congress, who's gone away, has the least power. That's the whole point of the way that this was set up. And so if anybody in the room thinks that we need to have a bigger federal government, we probably should check the R next to your name and switch it to a D.
Or just see us after and we'll explain to you why that position is not correct. Yeah, don't change parties, we'll fix you. All right, so do I believe in smaller federal government? Yes. Since I've been doing this, the number of people, well-meaning, smart people who've come to me and said, what are you going to do to help fix our elections once you're in Congress? And the answer is nothing. All right? I am going to vigorously defend Georgia's rights to run Georgia's elections. Because as soon as we federalize state elections, the Democrats have won forever. Am I right, election integrity expert? Okay. Yeah. All right, that's how that's going to work. As soon as we see that power up, it's gone forever. And the people who are willing to compromise it, I'm inclined to dance. All right, and beyond that, how do we shrink the government? We vote no, a lot, for starters. As long as Joe Biden is in office, or whatever puppeteer is pulling strings, or Kamala toward the end of this term, maybe, I don't know. But as long as Democrats are running the show from the executive branch, we're just going to have to vote no a bunch. All right? And then we're going to vote yes to a Republican